Hi, folks. It's me. I'm back. All right. Uh, my name is Ted. I am presently working on a roguelike deck builder game concept. I'm an independent game developer, I suppose by choice, because I got really into it and it's one of my favorite things to do. I've been kind of doing it for gosh, 5 to 7 years now. Um, I released a game. If you want to check it out, it's called Moose Solutions. Actually, I'll bring that up because why not? Um, Moose Solutions is a puzzle game, by the way. So it's my very first game. You play as a lumberjack that is, I'll view the store page, that goes through a, it's kind of like a Sokoban style puzzle game. So you anger these different moose and get them to charge different locations, and you hit these switches. And when they step on the switches, then the door opens. So there's like 50 puzzles in it. So I made a puzzle game, and I enjoyed the process greatly. And now I'm working on my next game, and I wanted to kind of grow a little bit more and just develop myself in a different direction. And I guess I just didn't really want to be the guy that only does puzzle games, and I wanted to expand beyond that and sort of understand what that meant. And then maybe if I end up going back and doing more puzzle games and that becomes my niche, great, that's fine. At least I feel like I tried the other niches that are available. And also, from a commercial perspective, which is probably the primary motivator, if I'm being honest, other types of genres are doing better on the Steam marketplace right now. So if you go and you go into the top 100 and you see what kinds of indie breakout hits are, what sorts of indie games right now are kind of breaking out of the mainstream more. It's really not puzzle games lately. So it's usually roguelike deck builder, horror games, some kind of city builder, those types of game concepts, something with automation. So like a Factorio kind of game. So then I got to thinking, gosh, which of those genres do I really, what's me? What's more something that I like to play that I also like to make. So I thought, gosh, I really love Factorio. I actually really, really love that game. I probably have put more time into that game than many other games that I have. So I love these kind of buildy automation type games. Love them. I do also like roguelike games. Um, so there's two genres that are very popular that I also happen to really enjoy playing. And so I just got thinking, well, why don't I try something in that one of those genres, right? And I had a few different ideas. The game that I'm currently working on is just one of those ideas. So Rogue Deck Builder is one idea for a roguelike deck builder that I had. Um, Other ideas that I've had for games in a similar kind of genre space, they the problem is they haven't been fully developed. They're not fully developed ideas. So I have another one that I want to make some kind of city builder slash automation game that has to do with blood, actually, like blood circulation in the body. And the reason, kind of the inspiration for that came from the fact that um, I have a heart valve repair that was done last year. So that was a whole thing, right? Where they found a problem with my heart. They found that I wasn't pumping as effectively as it could be, right? And so you have this thing called I don't want to go too much on a side tangent, but it's just to say I don't know, maybe where sometimes good idea or different ideas for a game can come from a lot of different places, right? Sometimes life just smacks you on the head, right? And provides you with plenty of inspiration there, right? So in my case, it was you know, you you go into the cardio, you go in and you go to the doctor and the doctor's like, Okay, it's like your regular checkup, right? So sits you down, puts the stethoscope up to your heart, and he's like, "Hey, by the way, like, did you know that you've got a murmur?" And I'm like, "No, I had no idea." And so I'm like, "Huh, well, that's interesting." And we're kind of like just talking. He's like, "Well, yeah, we're definitely going to want to go get that checked out." And I'm thinking, I'm a healthy, I'm a healthy 40 year old man, and I exercise right, I eat right, I sleep 8 hours a day, I've got happy, healthy relationships, like emotionally stable, all that stuff is good. But I have a heart murmur. And so they send me in, they do a thing called an echocardiogram, and it shows that um, that I have like what's called mitral valve insufficiency, which is to say that my mitral valve is not pumping as well as it could be, um, and that the valve's like a little bit more open than it should be. So like extra blood is kind of going back up into the left atrium of my heart, right? And so I didn't so I got this echocardiogram done, and then I go to the cardiologist, and the cardiologist is like, "Yeah, so here's the deal with your valve." He explains to me, and at that point, I'm kind of thinking, "Oh gosh, I'm fine." Like, all right, like I'm a healthy guy, and he explains to me that that no, actually, Ted, you're not healthy, and there's a at some point, it might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but basically this problem with your valve is only going to get worse. And what we're going to do is we're going to monitor it every like 6 months. And we'll do another echocardiogram, and we'll take a look at that echo picture, and then we'll say, okay, your heart's doing this much better or not. And well, actually, it's not supposed to improve it. It degrades over time. And so he's like, if at some point, probably within 10 years, you're eventually going to have surgery, a corrective surgery to fix the valve, um, to fix that valve. And I'm like, oh, no. And it's just like, I feel like it's like I got smacked in the face with a brick wall. And all of a sudden, like right after that consultation, I'm going home and I'm researching like, and I'm like looking up all the stuff about this, and like what's the surgery going to be like, and what is it going to mean, what's it mean like, and you just learn more and more crazy stuff about how the heart works and about how blood circulation works, and all of a sudden like, and at the same time I'm playing a lot of these automation games, and so I'm like playing Factorio, right? And I'm thinking like, gosh, actually there's a lot that's in this Factorio game that's very similar to what's going on with my heart, right? And so I'm kind of starting to put these two things together, right? And I'm like, well, that's interesting because like, um, you read about all these different heart conditions. You learn about what a heart attack actually is, right? A heart attack is when basically there's these special arteries called coronary arteries that feed the heart. They provide blood supply to the heart itself, right? And so if one of those gets blocked, then your heart is no longer able to pump. And so it's this like awful feedback mechanism that the system gets into, right? Where like now my heart can't pump, and because my heart can't pump, it can't feed itself, which means that situation deteriorates even worse, which is why a heart attack is so bad and basically kills people, right? And so, it's like at the back of my mind, my entire life, I had known that heart attack's bad, but I had never quite put together that actually what's bad about heart attacks is this feedback mechanism, right? And so then I got kind of thinking, because I was playing Factorio a bunch, and I was like, wow, this is interesting because actually a very similar kind of thing can happen in Factorio, right? Where I don't know if you've played that game, highly recommend it, especially if you're looking at making a marketable video game. That Factorio is the kind of game that Steam wants. Like it's the kind of game that Steam players really want to play. So all that said, um, there's a thing that can happen in Factorio where you can have coal power plants. Basically, they feed coal into a burner, and then that burner makes steam, which turns a turbine, which provides electricity to your entire factory. So you have a kind of a power system, right? So how does the coal get there? It gets there via a conveyor belt. Great. Okay, so in Factorio, you set up these automated systems where you put a miner on a coal patch, and then you have an arm from the miner that goes onto like a conveyor belt, and it takes coal to these coal power plants, right? Cool, we get that. But a beginner mistake that is common in the game, a lot of people, they don't necessarily like hover over the area of like the little like resource patch to see what resources are on there, because sometimes Factorio throws you a curveball and it gives you like a mixed patch. So it'll give you a patch of like of stone plus coal. And so your automated miner is getting like coal plus stone, and then it's putting both of those on the conveyor belt. Okay, so now you've got this conveyor belt that's going to your power plant, the main source of power for your whole factory, right? And now it's not just coal and stone, but it's also, or it's not just coal, it's coal and stone. So what happens? Well, they gets all the way to the end, and then the little arm picks up the coal, it puts some of the coal in, but the stone starts to back up in the conveyor belt, right? And then eventually, those little arms can't feed any more coal into the power plants because it's backed up with stone, right? And so then your entire factory shuts down. Well, what is that? Well, that's a heart attack, right? And so that to me as a game designer is very interesting, because it's not like the designers of Factorio, Mikhail Kovarik, sat down and when he made Factorio, he was like, yeah, there's going to be this thing that's kind of like analogous to a heart attack in this game, and that's going to be really cool. Like, I very much doubt that was even crossed his mind, right? Unless he was just like an absolute genius, right? And I mean, he's pretty smart, but like, I don't know that there's many people that could just, think of that instantly. So what's interesting is there's all this overlap between these really popular games and then truths about the human condition, right? So this heart thing that I went through is a truth about the human condition. It's this thing that I had to grapple with that's real, right? That, it's wild to think that my entire existence depends on this pump, and if this artery or this coronary artery gets blocked, or this pump doesn't pump as effectively, or there's like a little problem with the valve, like all of it, my consciousness, my ability to talk to you, like it's all downstream of this valve. It all completely depends on that. And so, anyway, long story short, I was thinking about some kind of automation game that relates to or has some kind of biological premise involving hearts. But I didn't have enough of a loop of the game yet, and I felt like that game would be really, really difficult, or I felt like it would be much more difficult to prototype than this game. So that game idea is kind of on the back burner for now, but it's all to say that I at least want to explore a different genre than puzzles, because while I really enjoy puzzle games, I sort of feel like they're very constraining in a lot of ways. They yeah, exactly. Yeah. It is. It's a logistics game, right? So Factorio is totally this logistics game, and that's kind of what got me like very interested in it. Um, you realize, because I'm doing all this research about the circulatory system and about how this is going to impact my health, in the long term, and I'm kind of realizing like, wow, I am one of these. Like, I am basically a game of transportation. Like that's what I am. You know, that's kind of what the human body is. It's you've got this pump, and its job is to get all these resources effectively around the body, and there's all these things that can get in the way of it. And I don't see, the thing is, like, I don't know that this game, that concept, yeah, that concept has ever been explored, right? I think that there are games that have blood in them. There are games that um, there's a lot of games that aesthetically, or at least superficially, maybe deal with the heart and the circulatory system, right? But they don't deal with it in a really deep systemic kind of way, in a way that affects the gameplay. So if I talk about, trying to make a game about my heart condition, right? Or about some of the stuff that I learned while I was researching the valve problem that I had, um, I think a lot of people would immediately jump to something like Surgeon Simulator, which is popular, right? Like that's fun, and that's a really cool concept for a game. But that's more just like that is, it's less about dealing with the actual systems. I think what I want is something that is like an automation game, but itself is a model circulatory system, right? Where like maybe there is a heart at the center of the map, and it's oh yeah, yeah, exactly, right, right, and that's kind of the fun thing that you get to do as a game designer is it's it doesn't necessarily have to be um, about the human. So you do a game about circulatory system. Again, people jump to this like very literal interpretation, right? So they're immediately like, well, it's got to be like a heart in the middle of a guy, and it's like a side cut view of like a guy, kind of like, and but actually no, like imagine instead that the circulatory system, imagine that you were playing Factorio, right? And instead of um, the main player character being the engineer, right, and the buildings that he makes and all that stuff, imagine instead that it's an alien race like the Zerg, right, from StarCraft, and uh, the beating heart of their hive is literally a heart, right? And you go to all these different resource locations on the map, and you connect them up to the circulatory system, and you then like automate. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So this is the other thing too, is like I think to make a game like that properly, it's like I've got a really like rough idea, right? But I know what genre it fits into, right? It's like it fits into this kind of circulatory, or it fits into this automation genre. It's probably going to be similar to Factorio, but not exactly, because it kind of inhabits a different space. But I think what you want to do is get as much background info as possible um, by just studying the crap out of biology, right? Like crack open some biology textbooks and read about the circulatory system, read about all of these other kinds of like nutrient transport systems that exist in biology. And you don't have to copy those systems like verbatim, right? I don't think that's really where good game design lands. I think good game design takes from those systems and then uses them as inspiration and finds something that is satisfying and fun to play. Um, that ultimately it is educational, but it's not educational in a way that it's like smacking you over the head, right? So if I did something that's like a literal interpretation of a human circulatory system, I think that is all of a sudden immediately like kids and adults and anybody playing it, they're just going to throw it right into this bin of educational game. And we don't like educational games, right? We like games that are just, they're games, they're fun, they're interesting to play. And so, and then like the education just happens to be a side effect of playing it, right? I think that's absolutely the case with Factorio. Um, Imagine if they were like, we're going to teach you about automation and you're going to like it, and here's our educational game about automation. It's like, yeah. But instead it's just like, no, they throw you into this world, and then you have to discover automation, and you have to discover why it's so valuable, and you get to see the effects of it, and you get to play with it. And then at some point in the process, after you're maybe 20, 30 hours in, all of a sudden your mind is just like naturally primed with automation. It's thinking about it, and you might even be thinking about, just naturally, how do I make my life more automated, right? How do I take this thing that I've done that's so manual, and automate it? And so I think that's really where the great where games in particular can have great educational power, is when they are about that topic, right? Like, it is about the circulatory system, but I'm not gonna do I'm not gonna like beat you over the head with it. I want you to discover what is interesting about the circulatory system, right? And I don't even want you to know that you're dealing with something that is like a real circulatory system. I want you to make that discovery on your own. And then at some point you're like, whoa, like this actually is really, oh, and actually it turns out that like this is a real thing, right? And like, oh gosh, like actually I'm a lot like this. So that's going on a bit of a wild tangent, but um, so the research and literal information can serve more as tools. Yeah, exactly. When designing the game to be fun, but the primary thing, the thing first and foremost, is that it has to be a fun game. It has to have interesting gameplay. It has to have real strategy that you can employ. It's got to be a good game first and foremost. And then if a side effect of that is that it's educational and it makes people think and it makes people go off and research these things all on their own, then I feel like that's really where the win is. Because you're not going to get the audience if the game itself isn't interesting, right? It needs to, it's got to be fun first, and then you can start to bootstrap all these other sort of, I guess I would call them like higher minded goals on top of that. So that's the thinking. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right, right. Which is like actually one of my frustrations that I had in as a kid, when, well, as a younger person, as like a 20 something thinker, right? So 20-year-old me, when I was thinking about or when I would read science fiction books, I would always get really frustrated because the science fiction, it was like bad science, right? Well, yeah, I'm making fun of myself, but so no, but I always got frustrated with science fiction because it was bad science, right? So like an example of that would be Back to the Future, okay, that movie, right? And that's like really pop science fiction. I'm not talking about like the great science fiction like Dune, right? Like forget about that. Like I wasn't even introduced to like that kind of stuff. But like let's look at like Back to the Future. I always got frustrated with it because I was like, no, wait a second, that couldn't actually work. Like this guy goes back in time, he affects the timeline that made him possible. Like you have kind of like the grandfather paradox. And I was like, why did they even make this movie? It's just like so scientifically inaccurate. But I think now, kind of like as a somewhat more mature adult human being, I now appreciate that, oh, like a lot of this is not about being literally and really like real scientific. It's more about using it as a premise to explore the relationships between the characters, and maybe to explore a little bit about what if time travel were possible, right? So it's more about that than it is about, and yeah, of course, there's always, if you look close enough at any story, at any world, at anything, there's always going to be cracks. There's always going to be something that's like not quite right, and the point of it is that most people aren't looking that closely. So it's kind of a similar thing here is in any game, pretty much any game concept that you come up with, there's always going to, at the edge of your world building that you're doing, there's always going to be something that is like kind of stupid and kind of fishy and kind of like, okay. Actually, like the last game that I made, Moose Solutions, I have like a rule in there where like if you get in front of the moose and you anger them and they're facing each other, they won't charge at each other. And that was like, it was a contrivance that I needed in order to stop certain like a condition that I didn't want to have happen, where like the moose charge each other and they're at like different offset tile positions. I didn't want that to happen, so I had to put in this like contrivance. But when I did that, it also kind of like makes it so now there's like a funky edge at the edge of the world building, right? And like there's something that's like a little bit off about it. So I think pretty much anything that you design is going to have that kind of stuff, and that's okay. Like you have to say, okay, well, primarily what I'm doing is I'm making a game, and the science isn't going to be 100% accurate, and it's not going to totally map to the real world, and there's going to be a bunch of like really fanciful elements, but if it gets people to think about the actual science, if it gets them to think about the human condition, if it gets them to think about something like their own circulatory system, so much the better, right? Then like I feel like I've done my job. So that was kind of a long, 30 minutes. But that's good background. So I'm trying to move into like a different genre. I kind of want to explore something other than puzzle games, just to kind of like round myself out more as a game designer. And yeah, let's go back to the Rogue Deck Builder. So I decided now I'm going to do. By the way, thanks so much for your all your comments yesterday. Kind of got me thinking, and I was like, okay, the game needs some concept of resources, right? I really think it needs that. And then the question becomes, well, how do you get the resources? So what I was thinking is, now this is not correct yet, but it's to kind of start pushing in that direction. So here's what's going on. These things are supposed to be rocks. I'm not a great artist, but I at least know how to like make stuff that kind of looks like the thing that it's supposed to be. And also they're not really in the place where they're supposed to be either. So, what I've got are here's what I want to have. Okay, here's the thinking. You have to pretend a little bit. You have to pretend that that I want to surround these rocks with. Okay, here's an example. What if like the way that you get resources is that there are rocks or there are trees or there are gems or there's gold or something out there in the world, and then what you do is you start to place the deck structure around it, and then you joist it together, right? And then, okay, so I don't want to use that, and I don't want to use that this turn. Okay, now I gotta defend. So I got these guys. I think I only have to kill 2 guys for this first one. Okay. Oh no, never mind. I got 3 guys I gotta kill. Okay. All right, I'll skip that for now. Okay, so the way that you acquire resources in the game is you incorporate them into your deck. So if I joist off this last section, then now I have incorporated this ore into my deck. And then I can use, and now maybe what this does now is it allows me to, just as a function of time, like perhaps as a function of waves, then I get more of the resource, right? So maybe if I like panel this off and now it's incorporated into my deck, I have this resource, right? So there's a few things I could do to get quantities of the resource. One thing I could do is, um, like I said, just have a counter where every wave that resource goes up. Another possibility is something more akin to like Factorio or what's the other game? There's actually like kind of like a kids version of Factorio that I've been playing. It's kind of fun. It's called Novalands. Novalands also has resource mining, and it's just something where like if you right click on the resource, then the guy mines it, and then eventually it runs out. So something more akin to Novalands. So maybe what happens is while you're defending the deck, um, if you have like a second or two, you can go and start mining, right? And then you can get a little bit of the resource. And then what that would incentivize you to do, of course, is to start to automate the defense of your deck, right? So then it becomes a little bit more of an automation game because what you're wanting to do is get the optimal setup where you don't have to defend your deck so much, and then you can just start mining away at the resources while it's defending. Or maybe you get automated miners. That's like a card, and so the automated miner will like mine the resource for you. But the idea is there's resources out in the world. They're randomly generated. You need to build the deck towards them, and then you need to incorporate them into the deck in order to start getting the benefit. This is still wrong because this is wrong for a lot of reasons. One, just the random generation is too it's too close together. So what I need to do is actually put a filter on these, where if the stone is within some distance of another stone, then don't allow that placement. So that's a relatively simple filter that I just haven't put in yet, but I do need to put that in. So I'm going to go and do that. But basically, this is sort of right. It's just I don't want there to be like, or at least I don't think it would be right if this were so dense. I think I want them to be a little bit more sparse, so that you have to expand the deck, like so that maybe there's like if you're looking at the screen, there's like 2 or 3 of these that you could go towards, and that is in addition to a number of other choices that you could make. So perhaps it's not just these rocks that are something that you could incorporate into your deck, but maybe there's also like this. That's how you get new cards, right? You can imagine that there's plenty of other things that are in the world that you have to incorporate in your deck in order to get them, and then that's sort of becomes because what I felt this game is lacking is a reason for the expansion, right? I didn't have a strong compelling like why am I expanding the deck? But if I put the resources out there in the world, then I feel like there's something to be striving towards. There's at least a short maybe not like a really short-term goal, but like maybe like more of a mid-term goal. And so the game can have multiple kinds of loops. There's the immediate like building and defending loop, and then there's the like acquiring resources loop, right? And expanding loop. And then maybe there's even like bigger loops like that, like sections that are like a boss or like an even bigger thing that you want to incorporate into your deck, but you need to get some other things. So I'm trying to kind of structure it like there's several different tiers of loops that you're going through, so that you're kind of always thinking about like multiple objectives. And choice making too, yeah, of what path to, yeah, exactly. So that's exactly the point is, I think that putting resources out there or something out there in the world, it's making you make choices that are not just about not just not they're not just purely about your immediate concern of am I able to defend the deck this turn, right? So, which is a concern. It's a valid concern, but I think the most compelling games, they have a lot of different types of concerns at different levels, right? So there's the immediate one, then there's like maybe a little bit further out, further out, further out. And so starting to have some of those things out there in the world, that kind of puts us more in those medium concerns. And yeah, so what does that look like? So I already had the part that that puts the rocks out there in the world, right? And this is just my, for folks that want to learn a little bit of computer science. All I'm doing here is I've got a basic, like, it's just a simple for loop, right? And then I've got some random generation, randomly generating a position. So due to the way that my games, the way that my tile map in my game works, there are the actual post holes. Actually, I'll run this just so you can see. The post holes go on even tile spaces. So this post hole is actually on an even tile space. And then, and the reason for that is you can't have it, like, imagine if I had another post hole there. There's kind of no space between post holes. If I allowed that, this is kind of when I was doing, I wasn't really live streaming when I was thinking about how to do the basic patio deck building part. I was just figuring it out. But imagine if I was able to put post holes like right next to each other, then I would have this really awkward thing where I could have like 4 next to each other and there would be no space between them that something could go on. And so I thought, okay, maybe you could allow that, but that would be really weird if you did allow it. So I pretty quickly came to the conclusion that that's just not the right thing to do. And so, however it is that deck building has to work, one of the hard constraints is these post holes need to go on even tile spaces, right? Both in the X and the Y direction. So this, in the Y direction, it's also even tile spaces. And then the space in between is where the rim joists are placed, right? So I've got post hole, joist, post hole, joist, post hole. And then what that does is it opens up a space in between, right? Or multiple of spaces, right? So you could have like a really big panel that something's sitting on. It opens up multiple of those spaces. And that's where you can place all of your different constructions, is in that space in between the post holes and the joists. And so that's where I can place turrets. It's where I can have perhaps resources that I have incorporated into the deck that I can then mine, right? So that's just the rule, which means that just logically speaking, a logical consequence of that set of rules is all resources must be placed on an odd tile position. So that's what that logic is. When generating, yeah, rocks go on odds, exactly. Any kind of resource or any kind of building or anything, just as a fundamental rule, has to go on odds, odd tile spacing. So how do we do that in code? The quick sort of cheat way to do it is to use this modulus operator. So what's this doing? Well, it's getting me like the remainder. So first thing this will do is it's going to like randomly generate a column, right, for the tile to go on. And then that column is going to be any number between 100. So there are, right now at least, there are 100 tiles in the X direction and 100 tiles in the Y direction. And so I get a column that, I get a random number, and that number is going to be between 0 and 100. And then, and it's not necessarily going to be odd or even, but if I try to divide it by 2 and then and then the remainder of it, because that's kind of what this modulus operator does, it gives me the remainder. If the remainder is if there's no remainder, then it's got to be even, right? So I try and divide it by 2, there's no remainder. Does the object mark where what it is, or is what is there, or is it just for rendering? Oh yeah, so great question. So yeah, so the what is there, so that is an interesting kind of question, and it sort of deals with right. So you're talking about this struct like right here, perhaps, or this like, well, that's a pointer to a struct, but there are a number of different the tile map. Yeah, so the tile map is basically just it's kind of like the coordinate system that I use, and it is mostly it's kind of used for both. So there's a lot of different ways that this game knows what its state is. So that, and you're right to point out that there's, yeah, exactly, like does it get occupied? So what you're basically talking about creating some kind of convenient mappings for state, right? So we have a lot, so these are all like the different kinds of maps. And I have a lot of maps. I actually think that a lot of game development is, yeah, exactly, and it is a 2D array. A lot of game development is like this kind of map making. So I wasn't sort of expecting that to be the case, but it turns out it is. So I've got actually a number of different maps that I use presently. I've got the tile. I do have the tile map, and this is perhaps incorrectly named or used, because generally speaking, it's meant to be like perhaps meant to be a little bit more generic than the way that I'm using it. But the way that I'm using my tile map structure in this game is it's actually just used for the player interactive collision, colliding with the environment. So in this case, like I've got every tile has a struct that represents its state. So the tile value is actually one of these structs, and it's got a player collision map value. So collision mapping relative to like what's relevant to the player, and then there's a separate one for enemies. So the player has different collision logic than the enemies do, right? The player collides with the edge of the and I could actually show you this. The player collides with, this is my, wait, yeah. I have multiple of these. It's getting confusing. Wait, is this the player one? Oh, here's the player one. Okay. So this is so everything that's in pink here is something that the player collides with, right? And the way that those tiles, and notice that it's all just based on tiles. So the tile map actually has values at each position for the player's collision and also for enemy's collision. And when I'm running the collision of the player against it, I'm just checking that tile map. So in this case, it's drawing a few things here because I use it to debug a lot of different parts of the game's collision system. I've got this little like box right here under the player, and this is sort of like I've got where I'm drawing the player, which is separate from where I'm doing his collision, which is this box right here. So that box it collides with something in this tile map. So I have just the tile map that I'm using just for the player's collision and also for enemy collision. I think Okay, so now this is the enemy collision map, which is inverted, right? So enemies will collide with what's in the pink. So when enemies come at the deck and they attack it, the pink will stop them. So I'm using the same tile map, but then the tile values have each individual tile has a struct that's got data for the player's collision and also for the enemy's collision. And so I'm just using the same thing, but kind of in multiple ways. Yeah, exactly. So you have like different, or you can put like the same maybe frame of thinking, or like you can put you can group similar things together in the same map. So the thing that I call the tile map, I probably should rename to collision map, because that's what it's actually used for. It's a map that I use that associates a two-dimensional grid with data that tells me what to collide the player against and what to collide the enemy against, right? So it's this handy little abstraction just for figuring that part out. But I have another map actually. Could it be that the player and the enemy interact differently with information that is in a given coordinate? Well, yeah, exactly, and that's exactly what this what that map does. So I can actually go back to it and I can show you. So I have in one of my things, I have a function that basically populates that map, right? So it populates the player's collision data and it also populates the enemy's collision data. And that happens basically every time you put down a new structure on the deck. So if I put down a post hole, or if I put down a joist, or if I like cordon off a section and I like put a panel in and I cover that panel up, then all of a sudden that's going to have consequences for both the player's collision and the enemy's collision, right? And so there needs to be a function that updates that when that happens. And that happens, let's see, where does that, I think it's like adjust collision, yeah. So it's this big ass function. It's like adjust collision. Am I creating duplicates? So like a duplicate tile map for like one whole tile map for the player's collision versus one whole tile map for the enemy's collision. Is that kind of the question? I think with this one, what I'm doing is, yeah. So I'm using the same tile map, but at each index there's a value for the player's collision and then a different value for the enemy's collision, and that it kind of is what it is. There's not really any particular reason for it, because you can imagine, and I suppose another thing that one could do is you could have a separate tile map just for the player's collision and then a separate one just for the enemy's collision. And I suppose a consequence of that would be like, from a performance perspective, you would have more locality of access, because if you allocate the memory for the tiles for the player's collision in one place and you know where those are, and then you allocate the tiles for the enemy's collision in another place and you know where those are, then if you're more frequently accessing the player's tiles, it could have cache implications, but actually not really that many. So I don't think that it would be that big of a deal in terms. This is just me spitballing. I don't think it would have as much of a performance implication, but there are performance implications for basically any kind of way that you structure this kind of data. And a lot of that stuff, I think you want to figure it out towards the end of the project. For me, I just thought it was a little bit simpler to have one map that just kind of deals with collision, and every value has got tiles that are relevant to the collision data for maybe, the player or enemies or other kinds of things that have to collide. But I have a different map, actually. I've got another map that's just, and it's a lot like a tile map. In fact, it works basically the same way. I call it the gameplay state map. Um, yeah, sidetracking. No, 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 it's fine. Like actually, just explaining a lot of it is good because you can't really set up the resources for the game unless you have some way of tracking all of this stuff, right? So how can I have logic about like if my goal in putting resources down on the map is to make it so that the same resource doesn't get generated on the same tile, right? So no repeat tiles, right? Also, I want to be able to check that within some radius, right? So maybe what I have is like I enforce a rule that's like I can't have rocks within a 10 tile radius of each other, right? Because that's too close together. Well, the only way that you can do that is by having some kind of a map that tells you where the stuff is, right? So what I can and then when I am checking if I have any nearby rocks, right? I have to check that map, and that's kind of what this gameplay state map does. And so for every tile, I have a thing that's called a gameplay state. So every tile is just a gameplay state. And what's it got? It's just got entity indexes, right? Or entity indices, as you would say. And then I can use those to look up state about the entity that happens to occupy that position. And the convenient thing is that entity indexes are relatively small. They're just an unsigned 32-bit integer. So it's not like we're stuffing a lot of data in there. We're just stuffing like a reference, right? And then what we can do is we can go look that up. It could be an area. Yeah. Although I'm not sure what you mean by area. Um, so we have panels, for example. There's data about the area that it occupies when you put it down. So right. So you're talking about when I have yeah. So there are when it does collision, what you can say is you can say that there's something that you collide with at this position, right? And then that thing that you collide with at that position has an area of some kind, right? And you can store that somewhere, right? So maybe what I do is I store that in the game's entity system, which I have, yeah. So entity.h. This is just all of the like entities that are in the game. So I've got different kinds of entities, but some of them, an example of like something with an area would be like a deck building entity. So some of the more complicated things that you can build on your deck have a deck building entity. And that can tell us like what the tile width of it and then the tile height. So if I have a panel, this says how wide it is and then also how tall it is. And then I can run some logic on that to figure out what to draw, but also to kind of figure out if something is on a panel, right? If it's sitting on a panel, I can figure that out. So you can store this kind of state. You can store a similar state about the width and height of something that I'm going to do collision logic on, right? So I want it to be at least the width of a tile, at least the height of a tile. Otherwise, there's like little gaps in between that I can get through. We don't want that. So hopefully I'm answering some of the question. But the point is that a lot of times when you're making games like this, there's a lot of maps. I haven't even gone through all the maps. So the gameplay state map is one of those where I just have different entity indices that are on there. But I also have another one that's for enemies. So that's a special one because when you're shooting at enemies, you want like a structure that's actually really fast to access that can get you all the nearby things to collide against. Because when you're taking that fireball, you know, when you shoot the gun and the fireball's moving, so when creating new rocks, they can't collide with previous rock area in the rock map. Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of that, but it's not. I think the way that you're framing it is perhaps a little bit more continuous, right? Actually, the state in this case, it's more of a discrete quantity. So it's more of like it's not like it's not doesn't have like a floating point quality. You can really just say discretely, a rock can go on, like a rock is occupying this tile or not. A rock is occupying that tile or not. And so one of the ways that you could do that is actually what I'm just about to do. I'm going to modify my gameplay state map, and then I'm just going to add in another entity index that's just rock entity index, right? And so now when I check this map, I can point at any position on the map and I can be like, is there a rock there? If the entity index is greater than 0, there's a rock there. So don't put it there. So that's kind of how that works. And you'll see. So then the first thing that I'm going to do is actually before this is actually as a precondition. Well, but say they occupy more than they actually do, like tax evade. I'm not sure I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that. So I maybe what you there's a lot of ways that I'm not sure I understand. So at least in this game, like a tile is going to have a resource on it or it's not. I would call that more discrete in nature. It's not like a tile can kind of have half of a resource or like 3.2% of a resource. It either has that resource on it or it doesn't. And so I guess I don't understand like if like now we can draw the rock to be bigger than the tile that it's sitting on, right? But that's more just like a rendering decision. That's something like when it comes to deciding what to draw, right? And we look at like okay, we've got a rock and it's at this tile position. Maybe what we want to do is we want to scale up the drawing. That's in terms of the pure state of the game. That's different. Oh, I see. I see what you're saying. It takes one tile, but having the 5 tiles occupied in logic prevents. So you could do that, right? So that's one. That's kind of one way of tackling the problem. But I think kind of another way. What I would do is I would just I guess I would say that there's no need for the extra state that you're talking about. So instead of having extra state that says that the tiles around the rock are occupied, all you could do is you could just anytime you're about to put a new rock down, you could just have an algorithm that's like start in the top corner, 5 tiles away, go this direction, you know, is there anything there, and then just scan. And if you find anything, then it's occupied. And so then don't allow the placement. Does that make sense? Cool, yeah. So that's basically what I'm thinking. Um, so we've got, which is kind of what I need to do. So to do, yeah, and again, it's I don't know that it, you know, at this stage of making a game, I'm not even sure that anything is better. It's because there might be performance advantages to the option that you put forward. But then again, when you're talking about performance advantages, you're talking about where do we really want to apply those? So, because there's a sense in which your algorithm is quicker on the check, right? So if all those areas around were occupied with something, and I checked it, I would be able to just kind of I would be able to do like an immediate check and exit out of that function really quickly, which could have some advantages if you were using this a lot. I guess it just kind of, you know, sometimes it's like, let's just do the quickest thing that comes to mind that doesn't, I guess what I don't like is like, I try to avoid situations where there's less, where there's a lot of state to manage. So I guess a lot of times my gut instinct is let's avoid having a lot of state. That like extra state that we have to manage is usually bad, but there are cases where it's useful. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. But anyways, like check within 5 tiles of the state map for existing rocks, right? So there's going to be some scope where we have to do this. So we're not just going to immediately allow this. There's going to be some kind of if thing. First thing, so now we've got this position, right? And we're not yet ready to decide if we want to actually, use this one. So we're going to make another position that's just the left top position. So this is basically just going to be, and it's kind of like an arbitrary, it's sort of arbitrary thing that we're going to check. We just want some area between where they're not, where we don't allow rocks. So maybe what we do is we say the X position is going to be equal to row minus like 3. Well, yeah, if it's 5, that's fine. Or no, column minus 3. X. And then this will be row minus 3. And then we just have like basically like I would call that like just the test position, or it's like the cursor. And then that's going to be equal to the left top position. All right. And now we're just going to do like a quick double nested for loop. So we're just going to scan. Another thing too, I suppose that you could do if you wanted to be like extra efficient is because we already know that even tile, like there's this even and odd thing, right? So any kind of like, it could never be on an even tile. So you could, I guess, optimize it by like never checking for even tiles. But again, kind of doesn't matter this early in the game because if you really think about it, when does this logic get called? It happens like once. It happens once at the beginning of the game when we're generating the map, and so it never really affects the rest of the game. So I think the stuff that you want to be really fast is stuff that happens very frequently on every frame, not necessarily stuff that like, yeah, if we improve this and make it like a little bit more efficient, great, that's nice, but people probably aren't going to notice that as much as they would notice something that happens on the main game loop. So that's kind of why it sort of doesn't matter, and you can just kind of be like, yeah, whatever. We'll say like rows 0 less than. So maybe so the amount that we choose is going to be something like, I guess I'll just pick 6 for now. 1. 6 rows across, and then 6 columns across. That would put the position in the center. Column is less than 6. And then, there you go. Okay. And then at the top of the row, we got to make sure that this test position, that its X position is the start of the left top, right? Because the left top just sort of says like it anchors us in the X direction. Test p.abstilex equals left top p dot abstilex. Right. And then at the end of this, like for every row, we want to increase the Y position, so we got to do that. Right. So that now Then we got to also increment the X position on every column. And then here's where we do the test, right? Is in this intersection, right? So the test is just going to be, I have a thing that gets the, it gets the actual position. Let's see, state map. So get tile value, right? I don't know, just call it something, test state. Gameplay state map, which maybe I have that variable in the outer scope, I don't know. And then test position, test P, okay. And so if any of these happen to have rock entity index greater than 0, then we bail, because that means it's occupied. And that means that the randomly generated position that we have is like not valid. And we break. And this gets a little bit annoying. It's just kind of a consequence of the programming language. It's basically like all of these I gotta break out again. So if placement is, if not placement, if the placement is invalid. No, wait. This is starting to get annoying. Because actually that's false by default. I guess I could make it true by default. This is annoying. Yeah. I don't love to have like a while true loop, whatever. Whatever, and then I just break out. That's fine. For now. It might not be good. Okay, so let's like assume that it's valid, and then if it's not, break out, right? And then even break out at the end here as well. So I break out of the inner loop, break out of the outer loop, and then here I break out. Because I don't want to, why check anything else if I just don't have a valid placement? So, or I mean, I probably wouldn't even need that. I could just, this could actually be the part where I decide I'm going to go with it and add the entity. Oops. So I think, but the other, so now I'm getting the entity index right for the rock, and I'm testing it against my gameplay state map, which is just, like I said, that's kind of tile mapping that tells me where things which are relevant to the state of the actual gameplay, right? Which can be continuous quantities. It can all, but it's more often discrete quantities. Like, is there a rock at this position? And that's a binary thing. That's like, it's either there or it's not. You know, is there a post hole at this position? It's either there or it's not. So that's usually a lot of what that kind of gameplay state mapping deals with, is that it's the more discrete kind of state. So I have this, now I've decided, yes, the placement's valid, great. Let's make a rock, and then let's also, we gotta like tell the gameplay state map that there is a rock there, right? So the way that we do that is we take, we have to get the state from there first of all, and we have to get it and set it. So I just call it tile state. And then the position that we're going to look in is rock entities, the position that the rock is in. And then now what we do is we just take its rock entity index and we set that as the entity index that we just generated when creating the entity. And then we set it. Now we just like take that same thing and we write it back. So pretty simple. And then the new state is tile state. I mean, you could do a bunch of, you could do, instead of doing this, you could just get a pointer to it and then just set it on the pointer. These are all kind of like stylistic things. When you're prototyping a game and you're like in the early stages, caring too much about that stuff just adds a lot of friction. And that's kind of like why I harp so much on object-oriented programming and functional programming, is they're just so damn dogmatic that it creates all this friction that stops you from just smoothly prototyping something, or just like a lot of the problem is people like just not acting and like not getting something on the screen. So this, like, we're just getting it on the screen. We're trying it out. So we're trying to build it. Actually, it built the first time. That's impressive. What did this do? It did the thing that we wanted it to do. That's cool. So there's still a few kind of kinks to work out in this, of course, right? So one thing I'm thinking of just looking at this right now, this is better. Things are more sparse. That's great. But there's a few qualities that I would want to tweak a little bit to make it feel perhaps a bit more natural. There's obvious things like a rock shouldn't be on a panel. You should never be able to generate a rock that's sitting on a panel. But that's easy because that's just a quick check, right? Because we already have this. Actually, I'll do that right now so that I can it's like another good instruction thing. I checked for like the rock entity index, right? And I said if there's a rock there, not valid. Well, it's because I've got this map. Guess what else I can do? I can say if test state dot panel entity index. Is there a deck panel there? Right? If there's a deck panel there, then it's definitely. Well, actually, no. Wait, that might not be good there, because what that would do is it would invalidate. Actually, that might not be that bad, because it would invalidate anything that's like within a certain range of the deck, of the starter deck. So actually that might be okay. So we don't want things to be too close to the starter deck. It's like one kind of check that we have to do. Okay, so that just, I'm gonna say that's fine. Because at the very least it makes it so that it doesn't start out. You don't get rocks on the deck, right? Like you don't start with resources. It's an expansion game, right? You're supposed to go after the resources. They're out there in the world. You're supposed to go after them. So this makes it so you can't just generate a rock on the deck, right? Or within some distance of what's on the deck. So I feel like that's a good place to leave it for now. For this particular stream, I think we kind of sort of covered a lot about game design, and that earlier discussion was kind of a lot that didn't have to do much with the game, but I don't know, I like talking about that stuff. And hopefully you can see, though, that it's starting to move into a direction of there are things out in the world. There's a reason that you're expanding, right? To my mind, that's what makes a game like Factorio so interesting and so fun, is strategizing about where to go to get the best resources, right? It's like, oh, there's like a bunch of, iron ore there. Ooh, but there's a risk because there's like all these biters there, and how am I going to, fight them? And like, that's what I think makes that game so interesting. I think this might be a similar thing with this one, is starting to put things out there in the world that are maybe more dangerous or also a resource for you, and then you have to use those things to expand, that I think makes it a much more interesting game. It's like this extra layer that I like to have. So at this point, I'm just going to stop and see if there's any more questions. You think? Uh, uh, yeah, I mean, well, that's kind of so. What's so fun about this like low fidelity prototyping is you can actually be really productive. I think, especially if you also happen to have a quote unquote game engine or like previous, platform layer or like other stuff that you've done in the past that you can kind of build on. To me, I actually feel like I'm moving pretty fast, or at least other people tell me that I'm moving very fast. I don't, I don't really work that much. Like, I probably spend, maybe 5 or 6 hours on it a day, and I have a lot of other responsibilities in life. But I think what's cool is you get to like, it, I feel like with this kind of like prototyping with your own game engine, there's my problem is not it's never like, oh, I have to update Unity or I have to update this thing or I have to deal with this framework changing. It's like no, like I know this whole thing inside and out and I can very easily put new stuff in or take it out. And so yeah, yeah, exactly. There is like a lot of leverage to once you have your own kind of set of tools that you can use for prototyping. This is sort of like what I encourage people who are new to game development. Um, there's a lot of people that will kind of push you away from this sort of thing, but I just look at it as like investing. You invest in yourself, you invest in your tools. You're not going to see the payment right away. Like you're not going to see it today, but 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, when you're so much more skilled, when you have so much better tools, yeah, exactly. There's not this like non-essential friction. I don't ever, it's not to say that I don't have to deal with non-essential friction. I do have to deal with non-essential friction, especially towards the end of the production cycle for a game. Like on my last game, um, I spent a ton of, yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, my last game I spent a ton of time just on figuring out how do I submit it to Apple and all that stuff. And like I think I spent like at least a week just dealing with like this non-essential friction of Apple, right? But kind of a cool side effect of that, which I will just put on this because I'll put on the stream because I don't care. Um, a cool side effect of dealing with some of that stuff towards the end of the production cycle was I managed to get my game promoted a little bit by Apple. So I've got like my app analytics for Moose Solutions, my last game. And yeah, see, so over the course of the last maybe month, I got 3 million impressions for this game and like thousands of product page views. And all of this is because I dealt with the friction of Apple. And so it's kind of interesting, like how, um, there is this like that's always going to be a part of the production process for anything. But at the same time, just picking and choosing what kind of non-essential friction you want to have is very important. I never want to have or maybe it is, maybe that is essential friction because like you're going to have to like get that you're gonna have to get it on the platform, and there's always some amount of like bullshit that you're gonna have to deal with, but you can pull that lever a little bit more yourself. Like you actually do have more control than you think. Um, I have to have I think I have to have a relationship with Apple, or at least like most of the time it's beneficial for me to have a relationship with Apple. But there's no reason that I have to have a relationship with Unity or Unreal or any of those companies or Godot or any of that. I get to choose not to do that. And even C++, I don't really like C++. I get to choose to have that relationship. At some point, I might decide, screw it, I'm going to go with Odin, or I'm going to go with Jai, or I'm going to go with something else. I can make that decision. Um, so you do get the benefit of building your own stuff, and it's more like a lot of this kind of grew out of my frustration with dealing with a lot of these frameworks and not feeling super productive. Knowing that I'd have to invest all this time into it, sure, but eventually you gain a kind of comfort, and then your projects start to go a lot more smoothly. So I'll just end it on that. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you. I'll see you next time.